and this is because they believe their place in the afterlife is worth more than the lives of others and the lives of themselves. In regions dominated by these religions, non-believers are more likely to be harassed and forced to convert, as they are viewed as like unpure or not going to make it to this place. Now, on to my second point. Why do members of religion benefit? Now, first reason for this: less likely to harm themselves in the name of religions. For example, Jehovah's Witness not taking blood transfusions and just dying like that. That's an obvious harm, and that they believe that by taking a blood transfusion they're not going to heaven. Comparatively, on our side, they would just do it because they see that instead of not going to heaven, they're looking for the more mortal benefits. In religions without an afterlife, there is nothing worth dying for. There is an incentive to keep living to see if these costs come to fruition. Okay. Secondly, this is on the comparative, there is more general anxiety in people's lives and the stakes are higher. Now, for the reasons I just gave you, people obviously view this afterlife as a very important thing to them. Now, they're going to be constantly anxious that every action that they take may not lead them to get to this place. So they're going to be anxious about what they do, like who they talk to, the actions and the decisions that they make among their relationships, as to whether it has negatively or positively affected them in getting to this place. And they'll be affected in this way, constantly worrying about it, which is detrimental to their life state, because just living a life of constant anxiety is not good for anyone. Thirdly, you can relate to people who are non-religious. So, for example, someone who doesn't want to lose their job gets it because that's something that the person on our side of the house that we prefer. That's what they hold to a high esteem. This is very similar to a person who is non-religious. They still value the same tangible, mortal things. Comparatively, when someone who believes in an afterlife is a soul who doesn't think, it's harder to form meaningful connection, which is an extreme harm because people need to have meaningful connection in their life. Thank you.
Oh my god. Okay. I thank the speaker for this speech, and I invite up first negating.
In our absolute worst case, that Jehovah's Witness dies happily and peacefully, believing they will now see everyone they love in the kingdom of heaven. In their best case, their religious person feels ripped off by their own system, feels cheated, feels as they've wasted their entire life on nothing, and has severe emotional turmoil and dies in distress. A couple things to do. One quick response on terrorism, then some general framing, then a point on hope and comfort, then on societal benefit overall. Note a lot of this point is quite comparative to a look at their case. Okay, so a very quick response on terrorism, right? I just want to note that terrorism doesn't just stem from a want of eternal bliss. It fuels from extreme hatred, right? I think why? Two reasons. One, most religions are deeply anti-violent. I mean, thou shalt not kill, etc. Right? Especially Abrahamic religions. But I think secondly, it is a super high barrier barrier of entry to literally kill someone, right? I think on both sides of the house, there are very distinct factors that make you so extreme to this point. I think extremist groups still exist on their side of the house, onto framing, right? So what does a reward in the afterlife look like? I think this looks like, in a heaven, an eternal happiness, eternal bliss, whatever, right? A place in existence, you get benefits, everyone that you love is there, everything is perfect, it's a utopia, just love and happiness. I think, note here, this doesn't look like the existence of eternal punishment. This isn't the scope of the debate. Why is this true? One, the mood specifies specifically about the reward capacity, right? This doesn't talk about punishment, this is a debate about purely reward. But secondly, even if they just break the parameters of this debate and bring up hell, narratives are severely changing within religion, right? This combats that anxiety material because the majority of Christians, including Pope Francis himself, just don't believe in hell because of the message of Jesus believing that he died for your sins and society just generally adapting over time, right? I think also note this devotion to religion probably just looks like, following the key principles and values of this religion, living a life in accordance with this, so selflessness, kindness, etc., right? Okay. Firstly, on hope, purpose, and comfort. So some context here, right? The world is a very scary place to live in right now, especially because it is so uncertain. Nobody knows how death actually plays out, what is going to happen tomorrow, what the future will bring, the human condition, anything at all, right? Religions with an afterlife present more hope and comfort. Why? 4 mechanisms here, right? Firstly, when you expect benefits to be a trade system like they do, you buy out of religion a lot more. So let's say you do one good deed, right? You believe in a karmic system, you donate $200, but then something bad happens. Maybe your car breaks down, maybe your debate team doesn't break, maybe your mother dies, right? I think there's a scale of bad things that can happen to you. I think this really shakes your faith and creates doubt, right? Because how can you believe in a karmic system if you feel cheated by it, right? I think anyone who has a hard life or any hardship at all, though the majority of people will face some sort of hardship, now just have 2 main possibilities. Firstly, you doubt yourself severely. You think you must be a failure. You think you must be a terrible person because you're being punished by the heavens. Or secondly, you buy out of your religion. At the very least, you just severely doubt and question, leading to severe inner turmoil and emotional confusion. Okay, second myth here, instead, when there's an afterlife, everything will work out in the end. You can eventually rise above this hardship. This makes it a lot easier to deal with things. 3, it provides some sense of understanding to the most traumatic and unexplainable things in your life, right? Maybe your grandmother dies, right? Instead of believing in abstract, hard to understand concepts like oblivion, you believe she's in a better place. She is happy, she knows you, she loves you still, she lives on beyond her death in your mind. I think 4 here, you just know life is unpredictable and just could end randomly, right? Terminal illness, right? Under afterlife religions, you can just die peacefully. In their world, you run out of things to do. You have already gotten the maximum amount of benefits and rewards you can in your life. That's it. This is a terrifying realization. The outcomes of this point, right? You just have more faith and hope, right? You're just better equipped to deal and face challenges. Look less likelihood of mental health crises, of general existential dread. Note how many religious people there are in the world. This applies to literally anyone who believes in an afterlife religion. I think this is very important, right? A quick piece of comparative here, right? Even if you believe all the terrorism material, right? I think when you believe that terror is still at such a some degree, exists on both sides of the house, I think what you have to buy then is maybe 3 more terrorists versus the entire world just feeling so much better, right? Generally you live a happy life, there's always a force carrying you, there's always better things to come, you spend less time in doubt and distress and turmoil. Religion is the most certain thing in your life. Doubting this goes against your own perception of your own identity. I think that in their world, you just feel like a bad person if you believe in karma and bad things happen to you, right? You spiral, what have I done wrong? Psychological harm here, right? Maybe you just buy out of your only source of hope altogether. Do not underestimate the psychological harms here. I will take the POI.
When religions have an incentive to invent an idea of hell because it makes them more convincing at converting other people, and because religions that invent hell spread faster, don't you agree that there is significant harm here?
Look, I think I told you already in framing that just the vast majority of people in the modern day just don't believe in a hell because it's quite an outdated idea. But I think even if they do, right, I just think you even told me in your first speech it's just more likely that people just believe nothing happens, right? I don't think that's big of a harm, right? You just even exactly what happens on your side happens and there's no change there. Or you just go to heaven, have a great life, see all your family again. I think this is a great thing to strive for. Okay, this leads me to societal benefit, right? Why are you likely to strive to these things and what does that do to the world? So some context here, right? Most afterlife doctrines have something to do with selflessness. That now everyone is better off and advantaged when you follow going to an afterlife, right? A couple mechanisms here. Firstly, you don't need to budget your time. Material goods are the benefit for them, right? This is what they rely on, this is all they get. I think what this means is you're likely to try and enjoy your benefits while you're alive. You hoard your wealth, you indulge selfishly, you keep it all to yourself. You're not going to spend time volunteering or anything like that because this is the only life you get and all your rewards are within your life.
You are.
No, thank you. I think comparatively, you just don't need to receive anything to receive membership of God's children or something. You probably just give stuff away, donate to charity, etc. I think also you just have time to give, right? It's not about enjoying it as much as possible before you die. Instead, you go volunteer. You just feel happier. You feel like you're fulfilling your goal and purpose. Free life is one long race, right? You try to do the maximum amount of good over the minimum amount of benefit. I think this means the comparative is that small actions that get you just over the line of enough to get karmic benefit doesn't apply here, right? Because you're complying to the general principles of behavior, of charity, of kindness, of selflessness. This means more than just act in every scenario as a better person. I think for the volunteer initiatives, you don't need to be a part of the religion to see benefits here, right? You go out, you spend 7 years in the field of Africa treating measles. Comparatively, this risk just limits the amount of time you have your rewards, right? You're scared of getting malaria and getting hurt because that's before you get your karma, so you just don't do it. I think that outcomes here, we prefer a religion in which most people in the world are able to receive the benefit. If you're a struggling farmer in Papua New Guinea, people like Caritas come and build a clean water source for you. This world vision, this Presbyterian society, right? I think, secondly, millions of religious people just believe in an afterlife, even if only some of them volunteer and help. There's still millions of people volunteering and helping. I just think that people act more selflessly because their life exists for the purpose of acting selflessly. The afterlife is what matters. I am proud to stand.
Thank the speakers for their speech and invite up second act to continue the team's case.
Let's just check some responses. Is this recording? That's just all. That's true.
When religious people are told that they have a 60-year life to secure their only chance at eternal bliss, they are not going to act rationally. They will do whatever it takes, whatever they think it takes to do so. A couple things to look at in the speech. Firstly, on setup and characterization. Secondly, on hope and comfort and impact to the religious individual. And finally, then on societal impact. Okay. The first point of clarification, I think, is on the material that we hear from First Neg on like why it's unlikely you're going to have this idea of eternal punishment and therefore you won't have any form of radicalization. The first thing that we explained outright is that it's probably just a fair alternative for a really extreme reward to be accompanied with a really extreme punishment to create this like dichotomy to actually incentivize people to care about this really big reward that they're supposedly getting. Note the material we gave you about the incentives of religious leaders to like make it seem really bad to not buy into this religion because you end up in hell, you end up in eternal suffering, and therefore like you're more likely to join the religion that they are like leaders of. But secondly then, even if it isn't like an extreme punishment necessarily, and you buy it's either like heaven or just nothing, I think that's still probably going to lead people to act irrationally because they want to avoid not having this eternal reward.
Yeah,
if the option is having a so infinite years of bliss versus like your 60-year life, I think people are probably still going to not want to give up on that infinite bliss. They're still probably going to act irrationally. Alright, moving on then to hope and comfort. The first thing we hear from Neg is that like people are going to be expecting a benefit out of their life and then therefore they're going to buy out of religion when they don't see this. I think the first thing to say is that like if people supposedly I think that the chance that people don't see this impact in their life is just like the same as the chance that there isn't an afterlife. And so like if you buy that people are going to buy if you buy that people's capacity to buy out of a religion is based on whether or not they have like facts and proof. We tell you that people are probably just more likely to buy out of a religion when you have a reliance on an afterlife benefit that you aren't sure of. You can't ask someone who's died if they got into heaven or not. And so I think what that means then is that when you look at your own life and you see things like the happiness that you do have, when you look for the positives in your life, when you see the positive moments that you share with your family and your friends, that is probably what you're going to see as a reward. That is probably like the positive mindset that we have people having, rather than like this constant sort of frantic attempt to do whatever they think it takes to get into an afterlife that they can't be certain of. That is when you have people acting irrationally. The next thing they tell us is that like people are going to be rising above hardship. We told you that like you rise above hardship when the rewards are more proximate to you and you know that they actually exist. It's easier to be disenfranchised from an entire religion when like the entire premise of it is speculative, when like you don't know that any of it's actually going to happen, right? When you and so the next thing they didn't tell us is that like you know that life is unpredictable. But look, like I think that this is just the same on either side. I think like an afterlife is not going to affect your view on whether or not life is predictable. Right. Next thing to rebuild some of our setup because I don't think it faced sufficient response from the other side. I think what's most important here to look at is what the rewards look like. Like under our side, we have religions that focus on teaching rewards during your life. We told you that these rewards just have like less scope to like be extremely extreme because people can see the world around them. They know that like a promise that like if there's a religion promising $1 billion, it's just unlikely because people aren't just getting $1 billion as a part of this religion. I think that means that you just get people like more subtly bought into religion, people who aren't as extremist in their views in this case. Secondly, though, we told you that this could look like things just like family security, having a long life, and having good health. And obviously, these things are not as extreme or as polarized as side negating as well, which is about like obviously eternal harm, which is like a really large scale impact. What we then told you was that people's expectations will just adjust to their current situation because they know that these like rewards have to be realistic. They know that like the rewards that you're going to get are going to be like have to be something that can actually happen because you can see the world around you. Right. I think what you buy at the end of this is firstly that like people probably just aren't likely to be buying out of religions based on like the fact that they don't have facts because religion is inherently speculative. The point of religion is to answer the most speculative question that is a part of the human condition, which is like what is the point of life? And so I think that like that material is just probably not the most important here. If people are buying into a religion in general, they're probably not worried about things like facts. Alright, moving on then to societal benefit. What did we tell you? The first thing we told you is that it's really likely for people who are in religions that focus on the afterlife to be part of like extremist groups with a foundation in religion. and that these are going to cause more harm when religion promises rewards in the afterlife. I think the response that we get from the other side is that terrorism doesn't come from like the hope of achieving eternal bliss. It comes from like a deep sense of hatred. But I think I think what we told you is that the fear of not getting these eternal benefits, the fear of not achieving this benefit, and like the alternative just being nothing, or like in our best case, the alternative being eternal suffering. That is what leads to people not acting rationally and doing things and like being coerced by religious leaders into doing things that they otherwise wouldn't do. That is when you get people doing terrorism and stuff like that. Because the second layer of mechanization that we gave here that didn't face sufficient response was that when people think that the entire point of life is to have an afterlife, which is obviously eternal, then they're probably just not going to care as much about their current life. They're willing to make sacrifices in their current life to achieve these benefits. That's when you get things like suicide bombings. That's when you get things like people being extremely harmful in their actions, and that is a harm that we cannot stand for. The second thing though is that people are probably just going to be more devoted to converting others because they don't want people to because they think that this harm is really large scale and they don't want people to be falling into this. This looks like people genuinely going out of their way to harm other people's lives, whether that is just at the low scale, just annoying them constantly, or physically harming them until they join your religion, because these people think that the harms that they're putting upon you are just going to be outweighed by the eternal benefits that they're giving you. The impacts here was that religions with an afterlife just actually have the capacity to cause huge harms to the people around them, right? This looks like the Crusades, where half of Arabia was genocided. This looks like suicide bombers of people who have different views to these people. This is the most important impact in this debate because of the scale in which it operates. When you have innocent people being killed at mass degrees, that is not something we stand for. Moving on into a split on inter-religion discourse. The context here is that when religions are based on inherently vague yet extreme outcomes, which is what NEG stands for, you get people with very strong views from several religions arguing with each other about what these vague harms actually look like. Okay, why do they get worse inter-religion discourse? Right? We tell you that under our side, you have just more civilized and less radicalized discussions about religion. You don't get people falling into the cycles of believing that there's so much more on the line than there probably actually is. Comparatively, we get people that are more subtly bought into their religions. This means that they just go to less extreme measures and conversations. This is when you get genuinely beneficial political discourse. That is when you get the benefits.
Thank the speaker for this speech and welcome up second Neg.
Life is horrifically scary because it's really uncertain. I could go to nationals 2 more years, I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. No one knows what is going to happen in this life. Okay, what am I going to do in my speech? Some stuff on framing, then on the benefit to self, then on the benefit to others. Okay, firstly on framing. Before I move into what afterlife and what true in life looks like, I want to note that all the ACT team's pushes on how religion, specifically heaven, is so speculative. I think the entire concept of religion is speculative, considering you can't just dial up God to see if he exists. Okay, then firstly, what does the afterlife the afterlife, like religions with afterlife look like. We hear from the affirming team that religions with afterlife, they're like, afterlife is eternal, it's unfounded, and there's like a threat of suffering and like miss out and like it's scary. Okay, what do we tell you about this? We tell you that like afterlife is mainly focusing on like love, happiness, general utopia, and like good stuff, right? This is why, like, you know, note in the debate motion is just like the context of only the reward. Secondly, we tell you at the start about how society has moved on in the last, like, I don't know, forever, right? There is more, like, we focus on like the messages of love and kindness, right? Society in general is more forgiving, less extreme. What this means is that in order for religious leaders to appeal to society, they spread messages of love, of hope, of like that being able to get into this internal happy life, like if your life is good. Okay, then what happens when rewards are driven away? F tells you that this is just like saying realistic promises, right? I think this is really unstrategic framing when I tell you that the happiness is always lesser, like because you have to be realistic. I think this means they have a high burden of proof to show that people are like so much happier, right? I think like this is really hard for them to do. Okay, what do we tell you this looks like? We tell you that the like true life rewards probably looks like something like the karma system, right? You put good actions in, you get good actions out. I think because of my intro, how I tell you the world is so unpredictable, right? I think there's just 80% of the time, whatever, it leads to broken religious promises. There is no, you can never be sure, like if your good actions lead to rewards. I think you can always be sure that you die, and if you have the belief that you go to heaven, then that is what matters in the debate. If you believe that you literally have thousands of infinite years of happiness, you should weigh this so much higher than like possible happiness in 60 years. Okay. Also note here, right, they tell you about like the stress of living. I think if you truly believe that 80 years is your entire conscious life, right, you have to fit all your benefits in there. I think that is really, really stressful. Leads to existential dread, which leads me really nicely into my first point, like first class here, about the benefit to the self, not at the moment. Okay. What do they tell you about the benefit to the self? They tell you that when your rewards are driven life, that you can live life to the fullest, right? I think this is actually like really detrimental to their case. I think it works quite well without like further point on society, but I will deal with that later. Then they tell you that not at the moment. They tell you that you're like not anxious when you've only got 60 years like to get your benefits in. Look, I think I've already mentioned this first, but I'll give you a couple more responses. Firstly, we tell you that you view life as one long race, right? You've got the long-term perspective in mind. You know that you just have to keep accumulating your like good benefits, right? I think the comparative here is that you always worry about like doing that one good action. You're running 1,700 little races. I think that is what is more stressful. But then secondly, life is uncertain, right? When you sometimes know that you do a good action and then you just like get something really bad, like your friend yells at you or whatever, right? I feel like you get a heap of doubt then. I feel like that is when you're significantly more anxious. Lastly then, they tell you that, when you get rewards during life, you relate more to mortal lives. I don't think people who believe in the afterlife just like ascend and like don't exist in the world. I think these people still very much have like immortal worldly worries, right? I think what happens then is they are better able to cope with it, right? They know they have the end goal in sight. They have this, like they have the ideal, they have the dream. This probably leads to like less worry, less anxiety. Okay, then what do we tell you and why hasn't it been responded to enough, right? We tell you about the comfort of this ideal, right? You can live your life ready for this like end happiness, right? I also think an important bit here is now you have peace in dealing with death, right? When you're a 12-year-old and your grandma's died, in their world she's just gone forever. You never see her again. Her life is over, right? I think that's really scary. When you have the afterlife, right? You know she's gone to a happier place. You know she is happy and that you will see her again one day. I think that is just like a massive benefit, especially if you're a young kid, right? Okay, what else did we tell you? The thing they gave us for why you believe, the benefits are like health and security, right? None of these things are guaranteed. This means that people tune out of religion, they buy out of it when they have just been betrayed by the one system that gave them meaning in the world that is so confusing. When the one system that is meant to make the world make sense and betrayed you and left you out of it, right? This is such a massive psychological harm in our world, right? You never get proven wrong because you always have this like You have the end goal. You can deal with your financial troubles. You can deal with the turmoil because you know it will all work out in the end. It's like watching a movie. You know Tom Cruise won't die until, like, you know Tom Cruise can't die, and it will all work out right. I think that is just like a massive psychological benefit.
Hey, why?
Like, you probably deal with stuff more stably. Okay, before I move on, I'll take a pill.
Do you believe that people manifest their destiny? And if so, then won't people on our side who envision tangible mortal rewards like a more successful life when compared to seeking an afterlife?
Look, I think people just like search for firstly, I think people just like search for good things. I don't think people with who believe in afterlife just like hate themselves. But secondly, I think to some degree life is uncertain and that you could manifest your destiny, but it still doesn't happen. And I think in that case, if you believe in an afterlife, right, I think you are much more able to equip when things just don't work out and it all goes to hell. Okay then, what happens with benefits to others? Right, they give you a massive push here on terrorism and extremist groups. Firstly, just note in their best case, right, you have one terrorist for every 100 million people that believe in religion, right? I think this means just on scale our benefits are so much worse. The more I mitigate this, the larger margin we win this point by. But okay, on extremist groups. Firstly, who are terrorists? We tell you at Emily, they're extremely angry, unstable, hateful people, right? I can add on to this, right? You usually have historical, political, or cultural reasons why you're literally bombing this country. There is a really high barrier to hurt or kill another person. It doesn't. They tell you religion enables this because you're willing to make sacrifice. Please note that not everyone who believes in religion is suddenly just immune to being scared of death or harm, right? I think you don't just become a suicide bomber because you believe in the afterlife everything's going to be okay. I still think you're scared. Right? I think what this means is you have to accept that for these people to be terrorists, there's a really, really high other causes. So, okay, really, really high other causes, like your historical or cultural, abusive, violations. Also note on their examples for, the Crusades, right? I think there was a massive profit incentive there, or land, or power. I think those are the real reasons. I think for extremist groups, I think religion is the icing on the cake, right? That's the message. The easy message, but there are definitely the underlying reasons that still basically mean you have essentially the same amount of terrorists on both sides. There are always going to be angry hate groups because that is just, you can never get rid of the underlying cultural reasons here. Religions are antibiotics, they're first to speak out. Lastly, we tell you about all these societal benefits that religions give, 40-hour famine, World Religion, so upset.
I think the speaker for this speech and invite up third F.
When every religion is perfect, and all of them say, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt be the perfect, most amazing human being that only wants to create good in the world, they still can't win the debate, okay? But to start with, I'm going to prove why they're not, right? It's because they're created by people. No matter if they're inspired by God or some other being, they're created by people, they're spread by people, and they're believed in by people, and people aren't perfect, alright? So the first point on this is about I'm going to do a few things in my speech. Firstly, I'll talk about the idea of hell, just prove why it exists in most religions. Secondly, I'll talk about who gets more good done in the world, about their charity and our terrorist attacks. And then I'll talk about I'll talk about the sense of hope, purpose, personal fulfillment. Alright, so on hell quickly. They basically just counter-asserted that hell doesn't exist because religious leaders are trying to take hell out of their religion. I think they said that it might make it more appealing, alright? We tell you that while this may work in the developed world, which is getting increasingly secular, and it's they're trying to find new avenues to get people to believe in religion. In the majority of the world, hell is still the primary motivator and heaven to get people into a religion. Why is this? Religions spread when people believe in them. More people are going to convert to a religion that has a hell because there's more stake for them. There's more at stake for them to not convert. We also tell you that religious leaders, we've already said this, are incentivized to exaggerate and create ideas of hell even if they weren't there in the original text to motivate people to join that religion because they have other incentives to get people to join that religion. Maybe it's money, maybe it's power, maybe it's because they want people to be in that religion. So that is why hell is a major motivator and exists in this debate and is likely to be exaggerated to the point that it is going to cause huge harms. Okay, so then, they say their main push here, one of the main pushes is that more good is done in the world because religions are perfect, they promote charity, people are going to do charity, right? And people are just going to do good things. They said things like, thou shalt not kill, right? We just tell you that many religious beliefs and people following them does not do good in the world. And this is pretty clear and it's pretty true, right? We see people choosing to follow religious beliefs just causes major harms. Yes, there's thou shalt not kill. There's also a man who sleeps with another man shall be stoned in the Bible. There's all these beliefs that people have interpreted, people have used to cause major harm. So just saying that people following religious beliefs causes good isn't enough for them to create a massive benefit. We also tell you that even if the true religion is based on good ideals, we just say that they get corrupted by people over time, inserting their own beliefs into them in translations of text, things like that cause them to often have harmful ideas. And then we also tell you that even if they get this charity, it just exists on our side as well because human beings are fundamentally selfless, right? We evolved empathy because it advances us as a species. So we just see that people take action to help people in either world. And we also tell you that any benefits that they gain from charity from their religions, we similarly gain from our religions because people are still motivated to do good in our religion, even if it's not to the same extent. Okay, so when they don't get significantly more charity, what do they get? They get terrorist attacks, they get the Crusades. What is their main response to this? It's that people aren't extremists. We completely agree with this, and this is why this harm is exclusive to their side of the house, right? Because there is no better motivator to change someone from their fundamental beliefs than being told that you will go to hell if you don't. That is how these dangerous ideas take hold in societies, right? Whether or not it's the fundamental tenets of the religion to go blow up buildings or do all these terrible things, we tell you that political groups have found it easily and continue to find it easy to hijack these ideas to motivate people to join them. That is the only way you get massive commitment to these large-scale harms, right? And provided that people are still scared of death, so they aren't going to go bomb buildings. We tell you that, like suicide bomb, whatever. We tell you that they're just fundamentally going to be more scared of hell, right? And we also tell you that, religious leaders are often trained at, giving propaganda or brainwashing people to, lead to them having these more extreme views. So so that is why we get such extreme action taken on behalf of religion on their side of the house. On our side, comparatively, it's pretty intuitive. People are just less likely to bypass all their values to go after these extreme views if there's just less stake in it for them and less threat for them if they don't. Yeah, go ahead.
Most terrorist actions are non-religious. Doesn't this show that the historical, political, or cultural motivations are significantly stronger?
Okay, yes, these motivations can exist, but in order to convince lots of people to blow up a building, things are just fundamentally extreme views, murder is not something most people are on board with. It's a lot easier for them to do it on their side when these organized religions have this tool of threatening hell to get people on board. We also tell you that it's just empirically true that religious motivations do exist for a lot of these things. We gave you the example of the Crusades. There are aspects of religion that can be interpreted to cause people to do harm. This is just true. So, why is this so important in the debate? We just say that extreme ideologies have massive scope to cause harm because they're extreme, right? Most people don't want to mass murder, genocide, cause all this massive harm, but extreme views do. So when we give these extreme views more power by giving them such a convincing and valuable tool that just preys on our mortal fear of death and want of bliss, we see massive harms. We've told you just more people have died in history so much for religion, and that is the fault of them being able to promise such a massive reward. Alright, so then on to the next aspect of the debate, which is about the personal fulfillment, right? And I'll just tell you first of all, this is a smaller scale harm because at worst it just isn't really killing people, it's just making them sad. We also tell you that religion, for most people, just doesn't need to be or isn't like the number one aspect of their life when it comes to the like ideas of like fear of death, fulfillment, all of that. Like people are more often just focusing on their day-to-day living, so it's only a portion of their life that comes down to faith. But what is their main point is that like when you know you can go to heaven, it makes you happier. We've already characterized why most religions don't just have it as an aspect that you're guaranteed to go to heaven. Otherwise it would be a pretty big benefit. But we also tell you that even if like people have no guarantee of heaven, they still just find alternatives to comfort themselves. Maybe they just lie to themselves and refuse to think about it. Maybe they, just tell themselves that they'll find meaning in like doing good to other people in their own lifetime, or just being a complete heathen and like doing whatever they want like while they're here. It doesn't really matter what they do. People are going like incentivized to try to live a better life where they just don't have to fear this as much. And the human brain has evolved to be able to find these sort of other methods of coping, right? This is sort of extraneous, but on the faith thing, they've said that like people buy out of religion more when like maybe the karma doesn't work as they expected. We just say that buying out of religion isn't like inherently bad. Anyway, okay. So on the other aspects of So we tell you for like the religious people themselves and how the religion actually affects their life. We've given you lots of mechanisms for why people are just fundamentally worse off in their general psychology day to day when they go through, when they have these more extreme beliefs that they will go to hell, right? Because it's just a lot more to fear about your religious beliefs when there's so much more at stake. This is pretty intuitive. This looks like overanalyzing every action, right? Or if you do something irredeemable in your religion, right? Like, having like homosexual relations just once, and that just guarantees that you go to hell. You're quite clearly going to live the rest of your life in fear of this doom, which is a lot worse than living the rest of your life just knowing that, you won't go to heaven, you won't go to hell, like nothing will happen. Nothing will happen is inherently better than going to hell in these people's minds. So there's a lot less to worry about. We told you that it can worsen your relations when you can't relate to other people as well. Their response was that you just can relate to other people. But frankly, I just can't relate to someone whose sole purpose in life is to go to this amazing afterlife that doesn't really exist. Thank you.
Thank the speaker for their speech and invite up third Meg.
That's a great start, isn't it?
Do you need a tissue?
No, I'm fine. I'll look really weird on the stream because I'll be covered in soda, but I can still debate. As long as my mouth still works. You betcha.
This was sabotage.
It's fine though, because I know I'll still go to heaven.
Temporary setback.
The affirmative side has essentially no examples of religions that adhere to their view of how the world should be compared to ours. I think this is pretty reflective of a lot of their problems with their case, right? When you have a religion that isn't like this, it isn't as appealing to people and it does not compel people as much to do the right thing throughout their lives. Okay. Three main things to do in my speech. Right? Firstly, framing on the nature of the organization of religions and the question of hell. Secondly, about the religious people themselves, and then lastly on the people outside of the religion and how they're affected. So yeah, the nature of afterlives and religious organizations. Essentially, this boils down to the question about hell, right? To what degree do people believe in hell in these religions? To what degree do people think about hell in their day-to-day lives, and how does that influence their mental state, right? essentially we hear a lot of like assertions either way about like the nature of like religious organizers and things. I think a thing that AF misses is that the people in charge of these religions, especially in the modern day, are mostly just like, you know, adherents to the religion, and they like genuinely believe in it. I feel like religious organizations today have a very clearly different incentive to what they did like when the papal states were like an actual government that were trying to fight wars with people. I think these days your goal as a religious organization is not to gain new members. No, it's really, really hard to convert like a completely neutral person into being like a Catholic. Your goal is mainly to retain people who are already Catholic, retain their interest in the religion, right? Retain their happiness. Note, if you are the Pope and you make all Catholics really, really sad, I think you've done a terrible job at your job, right? So again here, what I think is like the Pope is very unlikely to come out and just be like, you are all going to go to hell unless you do these specific things, because it's fear-mongering, it's bad for the Vatican's interest. Same thing applies to other religions with leadership positions like that. So I think what AF can claim in this debate is that people worry about a lack of the reward, but I don't think people on either side are worrying about damnation. I don't think people on their side are worrying that they're mean to somebody and 20 years later they get hit by an anvil that falls from the sky, right? So, and again, on this nature of like people like the Pope and religious leaders, I think they differ vastly on what is bad, but they're generally quite strong and consistent on what is good. I.e., like, depending on which Pope is in power, they might have different views about like whether or not they think homosexuality is bad, like to what extent or at all. But notably, all popes are always going to be preaching to all Catholics about the teachings of being good to the poor and things like that, right? Yeah. And so essentially there is no real counterfactual from the affirmative side here, right? Okay, so let's talk about religious people then, right? So I think our path to victory here is to prove a better quality of life through hope. This idea of religious certainty that we tell you all the way down the line. The biggest push here from the affirmative side is essentially one, that hope is an ineffective means through these religions of providing certainty and good to your life, and also that there are other things that are more harmful to you as an individual when you adhere to these religions really, really strongly to get in the way, right? So firstly, let's talk about expectations. We essentially hear this big push from the affirmative side that your expectations are going to be realistic to the situation, and therefore you don't get upset on their side when you don't see this karmic justice. I feel like this is just not mechanized well enough, right? In the case when it's a debate about religions, people probably don't necessarily always have complete, concrete, rational expectations. They probably, if they believe in some kind of higher power, do have an expectation that there's going to be some kind of purposeful meaning playing out in their life, i.e. things that are potentially not realistic happening to them sometimes because they're adhering to these things, right? On hope specifically, right, we tell you how this like eases the pain of hardship, right? And note the comparative, I think on their side, that they do not engage with enough, is that any time on their world that you see hardship around you, that you experience hardship, you rationalize that in your head as you have done something wrong. That is hell. While on our side, some people maybe believe that they don't go to heaven. On their side, you go through hell every single day when you experience hardship, and the first thing you jump to rationalize why you're experiencing that hardship is because you weren't good enough, right? You did not do a good job of being an adherent to your religion. Then, we hear this like push then finally from third that essentially hope doesn't really matter here, right? Because there are alternatives you can go to. I just think none of these work for them. Like the first one that we hear is just like hedonism. I think this is like quite a big harm in the debate when people on their side abandon religion and just like go through heroin all the time, and that's the way that they feel happiness, right? I feel like that is quite a clear harm on their side. So what about the other ones? Again, this idea that simply you just lie to yourself on their side, right? Without this certainty. They're trying to push that the certainty is not important here, but I think it is, because when you're lying to yourself, you know that you are lying to yourself, right? You still feel this fear that we tell you about all the way down the line, right? And then they also tell you that you will just decide to be good. No, we have so many more mechanisms on our side as to why people decide to do good. And once you push people to do good, we tell you why on our side they're more likely to feel better from it than they do from doing good on their side. Now, I think this is a largely a weighing exercise, right? Because a lot of the stuff that both teams say throughout this debate are things that can be like proven largely empirically true. I think our stuff is a lot more frequently occurring and it's a lot more tangible, right? There are much, much fewer obstacles getting into the way of your belief about the afterlife, rationalizing and accepting your fate, like knowing that your grandmother is in a safe place, right? As opposed to worrying about what's going to happen to you in your life. In the case that you get in a position where you might die, right, you know the certainty of that everything is going to be all right. I think this clash is pretty crucial because just numerically, most people in the world are religious. I don't think this is a small-scale harm if on Af's world they caught the harm that most people in the world feel worse about themselves on a day-to-day basis, right? So then let's talk about those outside of the religion. Our path to victory here, right, is I think to prove an increase in the potency of charity, i.e. save lives. I don't think we have to do this to that much of an extent to win here because Emily tells you the weighing on why even if you send like one humanitarian place to Papua New Guinea and you save hundreds of people's lives by setting up infrastructure that doesn't happen when you're not pushed to do this, right? The way that AF wins here in this clash is that they try to prove to us their best case that extremism increases, harassment increases, and people die and people are sad. Now, I'll take that before I continue on.
An afterlife expects perfection and measures how close you are to that ideal to let you into the reward. Isn't expecting perfection from people anxiety?
I don't think what religion expects you to be 100% perfect all of the time. When you go to Catholic Church, they do not tell you you need to get 100% of everything right all of the time. They tell you to like live in the image of Jesus, which is like our guy, right? He's the man, he's the dude. Same thing goes for other religions, right? You're not expected to be perfect. You are expected to be virtuous and put others before yourself. I don't think that's a thing you can fail at so long as you try. On extremism here, right? They tell us that people are more willing to make sacrifices and so they harm others and extremism happens, right? I feel like this is uniquely only when extremist cells are more accessible to you than your local church. If you turn up to the synagogue, the rabbi is not going to tell you that your prayer for the day is to go out and murder 50 people, right? So this automatically really narrows the scope of this outcome compared with the charity stuff that we tell you that applies anywhere where you can go to any kind of church, any kind of temple, any kind of synagogue, anything like that, right? And then again, terrorism is largely non-exclusive. No, most terrorism in the modern world is political in most countries rather than religious, right? Okay, on charity, note I think AF needs to disprove this, and if they don't, we win, right? They claim it's non-exclusive because of human nature, right? I think when the 5 biggest charities in the world are inherently religious, this is not true, right? Even with narratives, like at the end of the day, right, we win here because we prove to you that in the case that both terrorism and charity are both caused by religions, terrorism is so much smaller. Like some people, in their very best case, some people die, but in our best case, millions upon millions of people are saved every single day. So proud to affirm.
I thank the speaker. Now reverse the speaking order and invite reqrd up to give their speech.
When their biggest push in the debate is something that still exists to a large extent on both sides, I think we have won. A couple things to do in this OA. Quickly, so noticing their biggest push on terrorism, then on comparative, and then on like general charity social benefit. Okay, so firstly on terrorism, right? I think, why does terrorism exist on both sides? We tell you about historical, political, and cultural reasoning. We tell you about a large barrier to entry to like blowing yourself up, right? About joining a terrorist group is scary. It goes against everything you believe as a religious person, as we framed for you at first, but also just like this only applies if you have direct contact with a terrorist organization. Like, it just doesn't apply to almost every single person in the world unless you live next to ISIS headquarters, which you probably just become a terrorist anyway, right? I think that, like, this is, like, very uncertain, right? I think at the end of this point, right, like, everyone in the world that believes in religion, which is millions upon billions of people, claim all the benefits we give you, versus, like, maybe there's, like, a couple more terrorists. They don't do sufficient weighing here to tell me why I should care so much more. They have to give you a lot of work on that at least. Okay, so on comparative, they didn't give you a comparative, so you have to believe what we gave you, right? We told you about karma and karma justice, right? I think that there was just very little response to the idea that you face severe inner turmoil when you are promised, per their own characterization, health, family, and security. We tell you the world is scary, you can get hit by a bus tomorrow. You have no idea what happens, right? If your lease isn't paid, if your dad gets sick, if your mother gets angry at you, these karmic justice that they promised you just don't happen. Now, 2 outcomes I told you at first, you just feel like a terrible person, you are living hell. Eternal punishment may not be eternal, but you live it, right? When they also just tell you that afterlife just isn't real, this means that they are the only side in that would receive hell. This is just a silly response, right? Okay, so then at the end of this, right, I think you just have to buy that these people just really suffer from karmic justice because they feel ripped off, they disillusioned from their own religion, they have a terrible time, they don't have that coping mechanism we told you about. We give you all this material on why you just feel so good. You can deal with death, you can deal with problems. Maybe if someone you know dies in a terrorist attack, you can deal with it now. You know those coping mechanisms, you feel they're in a better place, right? Okay, on charity, right? Note that this is a separate path to victory for us here. The only real response we get here is that you'll just still do charity. They give you no mechanistic reasons as to why this is true. I told you at first that in their world, when you only reap benefits within a set amount of life, you spend your life indulging selfishly. You spend your life trying to reap these benefits because you don't have an afterlife in which you have eternity to do it. You have a limited amount of time. What this means for the debate is that they have to get all the benefits right now, all the joy right now. You just can't act selflessly to the same degree. I think this means we do claim all these outcomes, like almost all the biggest charity groups in the world are religious organizations that believe in an afterlife, because they not only do they want to get there, but I think they just want to do as much good, right? I give the example of spending 7 years in the fields of Africa treating measles, right? Again, comparatively, this just is a risk to you. It limits the amount of time you have for your rewards, so you're scared, you never do it. If thousands more people do this, thousands more kids just get cured of malaria, thousands more people in Papua New Guinea get a water supply, World Vision just saves 500 more children from sex slavery, right? I think this is massive. I think these organizations doing work should not be mitigated by them in this debate, because when you can claim such a wide scope of benefits, we will always prefer the religion that not only helps people within their religion themselves deal with the problems around them, but literally solves the actual problems in the world. I am so proud to negate.
Thank the speaker and invite the F reply to close out the debate.
Buddhists are the least extremist and the most charitable people of religious faith because their religion doesn't focus on the afterlife, because their religion focuses on seeking nirvana in your current life. 2 things to look at in a speech. Firstly, on the impacts to wider society, and secondly, on the impacts to individuals. Why should you care about the impacts to wider society? Yeah. Firstly, on scale, right? Weigh the harms that we gave you of extremist religions, or just the fact that religious people are going to be convincing, or at least attempting to convince others, in society at large, against the benefits of just to the religious people. But secondly, on death. When you aren't religious but spend your entire life under the grips of religious subjugation in the name of being told that you have to reach an afterlife, that is an incredibly deep harm to these innocent people who don't even buy into religion themselves. Okay, what did we tell you under this point? I think the first part of our material here was that people under neg are just more likely to be extreme. We told you it's because people will inherently act irrationally because they think that there is so much at stake. When you think that eternal suffering or eternal reward is at stake, that is probably just enough to outweigh any other possible factor in your decision making, right? We tell you that nothing is more motivating to put yourself and others at harm, right, than the risk of losing out on eternal reward. If you're told that this is what you have to do, or if you believe that this is what you have to do, you're probably likely to do it because of the eternal reward that you think that you stand to gain, right? I think Nick's response here was that hatred is actually what causes extremism. We told you, again, that nothing is more convincing than the incredibly high-scale threat of eternal suffering. That is the most likely thing to lead people to extremism. But secondly, though, on conversion, I think the first thing to say here is that this face very minimal response from the other side. But secondly, though, what we told you was that when you think that there is so much at stake from not buying into a religion, you're just probably likely to convince others or even coerce them into joining it too because you think that they should be buying into these benefits as well, right? At the lower level, this just looks like people spending every single day preaching to the people you love, refusing to respect their boundaries because all you care about is getting them to heaven, right? You might think that it's in their best interests, even though if they don't buy into religion, it probably just isn't. But at the high level, this looks like ISIS abusing women and forcing them to wear hijabs and to be modest, right? These people feel coerced into buying into these ideals when the stakes are infinitely high as they're told, right? At the high level, we tell you that this looks like everyone who is not a member of this religion being convinced that they're going to end up in hell because of that. That is not something that we can stand for. That is the largest impact of this faith. Moving on then to the impacts to individuals. We told you that religious individuals live better lives when they don't feel like they're fighting constantly to earn a spot at eternal rewards. We said that the stakes are not as high under our side, so you just get less anxiety on a day-to-day basis, and you just generally are more subtly bought into the religion. What this meant then is that you found other means of faith and hope in your life. It looks like finding joy in your relationships with your loved ones and things like that, rather than letting everything ride on your chance at eternal reward. They push back by saying that it's better to live in the hope of an afterlife than the suffering of not getting rewards in your life. Okay, firstly here we told you that if an afterlife exists, then existent karma probably exists to the same odds, and I think it's pretty uncharitable for them to assume that religion is just completely ineffective under our side, even though the odds are the same. But secondly, just knowing that you could eventually get this existent benefit that you actually can imagine, that is proximate to your life. You know exactly what it's going to look like, is what is going to push you through these hard times. When you know that the benefits are going to look like living a long life, or your children living a long life, or having good health, that is something that is far more proximate to you, rather than just the incredibly speculative benefit of eternal reward that you can never actually quantify. You can never know if it's actually true. That's when you get people buying out of religion.
I think both teams invite you to cross the floor, shake hands, and everyone can leave the room. Thank you very much.